In this, the last topic in this particular section, we're going to have a look at how we make decisions. It's an important aspect in as far as quite often the software that we create fundamentally involves the user making a series of decisions. We'll start off first of all with why it's important to us, and that ties into the idea of generally people like to feel they are in control. It is an important aspect, and rightly or wrongly we generally associate the ability to make choice as being the same as we're in control, though fundamentally that may not be the case because it comes down to what choices we're being asked to make and how much freedom we have through those choices. But still, making choices, in as far as we associate that then with control, it is an important aspect for us, for all of our users. And if you were to ask anybody, well, would you like more choice? They will go, yes. More choice, the better. And we'll see in the next slide that the reality is that's not always the case. It's very easy to overwhelm our brain by giving us too much choice to the extent where it actually impacts on our ability to think through and to select one of the items from it. So there's a couple of takeaways we can make at this point. The first one is that through our software, we generally do want to be presenting our users with choice. Give them options. Let's do that. And we want to do that even if we're sitting thinking, look, there's an optimal, there's a best one here. Let's still present that choice to the user so that they can make the decision that they want to do. The second aspect is that as software evolves over time, you might find that you have a better way of doing something, and you know that it's better. You've measured it, you've monitored it. It's just a superior, quicker, more efficient, more reliable way of doing things. Generally speaking, whilst you may want to present this as the preferred or default option, you would still want to keep in then the ability for the user to go back to the previous one, not to remove choice from the users, because quite a lot of people may not like that. Now, you may find over time, if you monitor analytics in terms of what choices people are making, that very few people end up using the old choice, then you can quite safely remove it, and nobody will really care at that point. In terms of us then wanting to exercise choice, there's a couple of sort of interesting studies that have been done. One by Eigener and Lepper in 2000. They set up an experiment where in one case they had a store where you had a table of jam, and there was one table that had 6 different flavors of jam. So users would go up to it, they would look through the different flavors and they would pick whatever they want. And another table, they had 24 different flavors of jam. So you might think from what's better, would you prefer to have sort of 6 jams or 24 jams? Most people would go, 24 jams please, that's a much richer selection. And fair enough. The reality is when they looked at then the amount of sales that happened, the table that only had 6 jams sold significantly more than the table that had 24. And the table at 24, it had too much choice to the extent where users were not able to decide what was the right choice for them. So in that sense, they didn't sort of just pick one at random, they just gave up. So a takeaway that we have here is that whilst we do want to present choices to our users, let's keep that to a small number, no more than 3 or 4 options as we go through. If we find ourselves in a situation where we do have a lot of different options, then the appropriate thing to use in that case is progressive disclosure. Or we might think about, okay, what's that initial choice that we offer the user that segments the options, the large numbers that we have, into smaller groupings. And it's better then to have a small series of choices of a couple or 3 or 4 items to narrow it down, as opposed to having one choice with lots and lots of different options. So if we do find ourselves in a situation where even if we have 3 or 4 choices and we're not certain what one we want to go for or what one's best, we at that point tend to be influenced quite strongly by other people. In particular, other people that we trust or associate it with or relate with. So if they would recommend something or if they've done something in the past, we would generally use those same choices. So if you find yourselves in a situation where you think you may be offering choice to the user and the user may not have a clear preference, it can be useful then to think about, okay, how do we help the user associate to find out then what other people might do in that particular case? Can we expose that information through the interface? Can we link these things in? Quite often in marketing you see it through testimonials or other recommended ones, but you can build these things in. So when we do think about how we make choice, let's say we have our 6 jams, quite often we use the purpose of satisficing. So it's a mixture of satisfactory and sufficient. So that means that we don't exhaustively go through all of our options. Rather, out of the options that we have, we'll pick the first one that looks kind of okay. Now, you might be sitting thinking, hold on, but how does that map up then with sort of 6 jams and 24? Why for the 24 didn't the people just pick the first one that seems okay? When we're satisficing, we have to get a feel for the number of options that we have available, as opposed to the initial feeling being one of overwhelmed, where there's far too many options, I couldn't possibly narrow these down. So when we're content that actually there's a reasonable amount of choice, we're not worried about it, even in that case, we generally don't go through looking at every single option and then picking the optimal one. If we see something that looks, yeah, that works for us, quite often we will then go for that particular option. That's the one that we'll take. Now, from an evolutionary point of view, that makes sense because it ties into making generally good, not necessarily optimal, good decisions and making them quickly. And inside an environment where a good, quick decision can make the difference between life and death, that's a better evolutionary approach, but it's generally the approach that we use when we're making many decisions. So how do we build this in from a software design point of view to recognize the fact that many of our users will satisfice in terms of making their decisions? Well, a few things we can do. So we can simply, and we should assume that if we're presenting choice, the user is simply going to be scanning the screen and is going to be picking an option that looks okay to them. For things like instructions and so on, people generally won't read them, they will just pick the first option. So all of these things is where satisficing happens. So what that means from our point of view as designers is that we want to make sure we have an idea as to how the user is likely to scan the screen, where are they going to be looking at, what visual navigation will they take, and let's make sure that what we think are the best choices for the user, that we present them early inside that scanning process. So they're likely to be the first options that the user encounters. So there's a greater chance then that the options that we think are best are going to be presented early to the user and gives it a chance then for the user to look at it and think, yeah, that's fine, I'll go for that particular one. Now, that brings us to the end of this particular section. In fact, all of the topics that we've had when we're thinking about how we operate, how does our brain work. We're going to have a small summary then for this particular section in the next video.